Our story begins on Kamino as the flooded planet has a single Jedi starfighter emerging through the storm clouds and descending toward Tepoka City. Obi-Wan Kenobi was looking upon the city with great confusion and caution, wondering exactly what he was getting into. The last few days finding this place had been surrounded by mystery, and it all started with the assassination attempt on Padme inside of her own home on Coruscant. Kenobi and Skywalker chased down the assassin, only for her to be killed with a dart that originated from this planet. So now, Obi-Wan was here, searching for the true assassin against Padme. But something felt off about all of this, and Obi-Wan told his droid R4 to scan the water for any sort of secondary landing spot. Obi-Wan decided it was too dangerous to just enter the city without knowing what he was getting into. R2 scanned for a minute, and after a bit, the little droid found a landing pad, but it was underneath the water by quite a bit. R4 says it seems to be sensor activated, and Obi-Wan told the droid he has a bad feeling about this, as the ship descended extremely close to the water, waiting, and the bottom of it touched the waves, and finally, a large platform emerged. Obi-Wan thanked R4, and he hopped out of his ship. The rain was hitting him hard, and Obi-Wan began moving quickly around the platform until he found a panel that he messed with until a tube opened up, and Obi-Wan decided to get inside. He thought to himself that Anakin would have thrived on a mission like this, sneaking around, bending any and all of the rules, and the tunnels would take Obi-Wan far underneath the water until he reached some sort of private laboratory underneath Tepoka City. Obi-Wan looked around, wondering why this place was so secretive, and against a far wall there were 5 beings in some sort of cloning tubes. Obi-Wan went over, seeing 4 nearly fully grown men in a sort of hibernation state, along with a younger girl. The girl was labeled as Omega, and the 4 beings were labeled Tech, Hunter, Crosshair, and Wrecker. Obi-Wan quickly realized this was all some sort of cloning technology, but he suddenly had to hide behind one of the large computer terminals as the doors to the station slid open, and in walked a Kaminoan wearing orange and white. Obi-Wan stayed as quiet as he could, but he was able to watch Nala Se punch in the password for the computer terminal and spend about 10 minutes entering in information. And as soon as Nala Se was gone, Obi-Wan snuck over to the terminal and he entered the password, pulling up all of the information that Nala Se and the Kaminoans had access to. It was all extremely overwhelming, but there was one folder that was obviously so much more important than all of the others, as it was labeled Grand Army of the Republic. Obi-Wan clicked into the folder and he began reading the most important information in the entire galaxy. Obi-Wan would learn that Jedi Master Sidious put in the order for this clone army shortly before his death, and after his death, a man called Tyrannus stepped in and took over the project. Obi-Wan had never heard of this name before, but it didn't exactly sound like the most friendly name, so Kenobi kept on digging. He found out that 200,000 clone units were ready, and 1 million more were well underway. Obi-Wan couldn't believe it. 1 million? It sounded absurd, but another area of this process suddenly caught Obi-Wan's eye, and it was labeled as behavioral chip. That, Obi-Wan would learn, was approved by Sidious, but modifications and new enhancements were made to the chip on a date that was after Sidious died. Obi-Wan kept digging in, but he looked over his shoulder a few times as this all seemed like information that was not supposed to be in his hands. Obi-Wan was now reading through this information on the chip, and there were a list of contingency orders, but one of them was highlighted with a warning signal. Order 66. Obi-Wan clicked on it, and he read the following description. Order 66 is a contingency order that identifies all Jedi as traitors to the Galactic Republic, and therefore subject to immediate execution. The order is programmed into the chip, making it impossible for the clones to disobey the order to turn on their Jedi commanders. Obi-Wan pulled out his datapad, and he plugged it into this computer console to download all of the information that he just found. And up in the city, Prime Minister Lama Su would soon be informed of a data breach coming from beneath the city. The Prime Minister kept this quiet, informing only Nala Se, along with Jango Fett, as they all knew that this intruder must be dealt with, or their entire plans could be ruined. And still in the lab, Obi-Wan's data download reached 50%, when suddenly both the entrance doors to the city and the exit doors to the tunnels were slammed shut and locked from somewhere else. Obi-Wan stood up, igniting his blade, and a loud hissing sound filled the room as alarms repeated the phrase, "Intruder alert." Obi-Wan suddenly turned to see the 4 clones, Hunter, Wrecker, Crosshair, and Tech, be released from their stasis chambers, They were all dropped to the ground as their preferred weapons were released from the wall. These clones were free, and they had their orders. Kill this intruder. Obi-Wan held up his blade, and he tried pulling Jedi Commander rank, but it was no use. A precise blaster bolt seared past his shoulder, striking the console beside him, showering the room in sparks. He barely had time to react before Wrecker came barreling towards him like a living battering ram, sending everything flying. As Obi-Wan flipped around the room, Tech and Hunter were firing at him. Obi-Wan twisted his body, lightsaber flashing around, deflecting another volley of fire. Crosshair was in the corner, readying himself for the perfect shot. Eyes were locked on Obi-Wan's every move through the crosshairs of his rifle, and a single silent squeeze of the trigger sent a bolt ripping through the air, forcing Obi-Wan into a desperate roll. The movement saved him from instant death, but not from the explosion of a coolant pipe behind him, sending a mist into the chamber that knocked Obi-Wan down. Hunter lunged from the shadows, vibroblade in his hand, heightened senses predicting Obi-Wan's next evasion, as the blade sliced deep into Obi-Wan's forearm. The Jedi barely parried another strike before Wrecker's massive fists crashed down where he had just been, shattering the floor. The force of the impact sent Obi-Wan skidding toward the reinforced glass that overlooked the endless Kaminoan ocean. Another shot from Crosshair knocked his lightsaber out of his hands, and in the split second where Obi-Wan was completely vulnerable, he made a choice, pulling the now fully completed downloaded datapad into his hands. Summoning the Force, Obi-Wan destroyed the glass in front of him that was facing the ocean. Water rushed in, swallowing the lab in a violent torrent, sweeping the clones away as Obi-Wan allowed the current to pull him into the abyss. His body was cutting through the dark ocean as debris and sparks sank behind him. Reaching out with the Force, Obi-Wan sent a silent call through the waves, desperately hoping for any help. This was a flawed strategy, but Obi-Wan noticed the water birds on his way into the planet, and as Obi-Wan was on his final breaths, deep in the water, it finally worked. A massive Awa emerged from the deep, wings cutting through the water as it neared Obi-Wan, allowing him to grasp its leathery back. With new strokes, the creature ascended through the water, carrying the Jedi towards the distant surface as the shattered remains of the lab disappeared into the darkness below. Finally, Obi-Wan would emerge from the water, taking huge breaths as he got up onto the platform. He ran over to his ship, but a split second later, the Slave One ship came up from behind Obi-Wan and blew up his Jedi starfighter. The datapad carrying everything that Obi-Wan found fell out of his robes, and Obi-Wan used the Force, tucking it just behind one of the light poles, out of view from Jango Fett, as the bounty hunter flew down from his ship and pointed a blaster right at Kenobi. Fett asked the comlink if he should kill the Jedi, but the Prime Minister told Fett to bring him into custody. They must know how much the Jedi has learned, and if he told anyone else about Clone Protocol 66. Fett obliged, knocking Kenobi out with a swift kick before carrying him up to his ship. And as the Slave One flew away, the little astromech R4 flew back into sight. The droid had sensed that Jango Fett was flying towards the platform before Kenobi returned, and R4 hid in the shadows out in the water as the Jedi starfighter was blown up. And now, with Kenobi captured, R4 returned alone to the platform in distress. The little droid found Obi-Wan's datapad, and a bit of investigation showed R4 just how important Obi-Wan's discovery truly was. And so, R4 went into action. The little droid used his rocket jets to fly over the water, scanning Tipoca City for any sort of hangar, and eventually, R4 reached a hangar full of clone trooper ships of all sorts. Clone troopers moved through the hangar, checking up on these ships, and R4 snuck around until he reached a clone fighter capable of transmitting a message far across the galaxy. When the nearby clones looked away, R4 got into the ship and he started it up, quickly taking off through the hangar doors. The clones immediately were alerted of an unauthorized takeoff, and clone pilots got into nearby fighters to shut down this intruder. And deep inside of Tipoca City, Obi-Wan Kenobi had his wrists now restrained as he was inside of a ray-shielded prison cell as Jango Fett and the Prime Minister began questioning Obi-Wan on who else came here with him, or who else knows about the information that he has discovered. Obi-Wan told the truth, that he was the only Jedi who came here, but when Lama Su was alerted to the unauthorized ship taking off, Obi-Wan genuinely shrugged as he wasn't sure what was going on. But now he remembered the landing pad, and he couldn't quite remember if R4 was in his ship when it was blown up. Obi-Wan gave a simple smile to himself, hoping the droid gets away with this, and R4 punched through the clouds, flying the clone fighter all by himself, as he was being chased by 5 other clone fighters. R4 began searching for any sort of transmitting signal, scanning across the galaxy, trying to reach Coruscant. The signal just wasn't connecting, and finally, R4 got into outer space. The signal finally connected to Coruscant, and R4 transmitted the data from Obi-Wan's datapad to the Jedi Temple just in time, as the 5 clone fighter pilots blew up the ship with R4 in it, and the little droid would die a hero. Back near the cells, Obi-Wan's heart would sink as he overheard that the ship was destroyed, and no life forms were aboard. Lama Su let out a relieved sigh, then turned back to Obi-Wan and asked again who else knows he is here. Obi-Wan said no one, and his restraints suddenly electrocuted him. Lama Su didn't have time for these games. He knew more than any other Kaminoan how vital the secrets about the clones and the Jedi truly were. Lama Su was working with some shady people, with Tyrannus and Jango Fett, but the payments were coming through, and Lama Su could not risk the clone army being decommissioned, or the Kaminoans would quickly be bankrupt. Lama Su needed Obi-Wan to tell him the truth, and then the Jedi would be killed. So Lama Su asked again who else knows he is here, and Obi-Wan didn't say a word. So Lama Su told Jango Fett to get into the cell, force the truth out of the Jedi, no matter what it takes. And across the galaxy, Yoda and Mace Windu were seated together in Yoda's quarters when the shaky transmission from R4 came through. Windu alertly got to his feet, accepted the transmission as the information was now sent to a data console in here. R4 chirped that Obi-Wan was on Kamino, the planet he told Yoda about, and then R4 blinked out as Windu and Yoda now had access to all of the information, including the important file labeled Order 66 that was exclusively implemented by the man called Tyrannus. So the Jedi had to come up with a plan, and Windu said he must organize a Jedi strike force to go rescue Obi-Wan immediately. Windu said he will contact Skywalker, but Yoda said he's already on his own mission. Let Anakin keep protecting Padme. There are more than enough other Jedi to go save Obi-Wan. Windu asked Yoda if he will be coming along, but Yoda said no. One of the key parts listed in Order 66 is that the order can only be given out by the Supreme Chancellor. Yoda said that if Palpatine is in on this grand plot, then he must be monitored closely. And so, Anakin would remain on Naboo, meditating early in the morning and feeling the Force around him. There were many currents flowing around Anakin, but he couldn't focus on any of them except for the ones surrounding his mother. He needed to go find her, and so he and Padme would soon take off to Tatooine. And back on Kamino, Obi-Wan lay barely conscious in his cell as Jango Fett stood over him. No matter what Fett did, Obi-Wan insisted that he didn't tell anyone else he was here. He was badly beaten, bruised, and this would go on for a long time, until Lama Su received a new transmission from the Kamino security. A large Republic ship belonging to the Jedi Order has just emerged from hyperspace, and they are requesting that the Kaminoans give up Obi-Wan Kenobi immediately. Lama Su ordered Jango to stay with Obi-Wan, and the Prime Minister frustratedly stormed off to go and speak with Tyrannus about this huge mess. And once Lama Su was out of eyesight completely, Obi-Wan waited for Jango Fett, and then Jango tried to kick Obi-Wan again, and Kenobi used his remaining strength, grabbing Fett's leg, throwing him hard into the wall. Fett pulled out a blaster, and Obi-Wan redirected the shots right into his restraints, knocking them off, and then he punched Fett in the face. Jango tried to punch back, but Obi-Wan had him caught completely off guard, and Kenobi jammed Fett's vibroblade into his jetpack, as the bounty hunter now flew forward right into the ray shield. Jango was electrocuted terribly from the ray shield, and he fell to the ground, either dead or knocked out for a very long time. Obi-Wan brushed his hair away and wiped blood from his nose before using the Force to unlock himself from the cell, and he chased after Lama Su. Outside the facilities, the huge Jedi strike team with Mace Windu and around 200 more Jedi Masters and Knights landed as the Jedi began spreading out to find Obi-Wan, and they were still unsure of exactly what they were getting into here. The doors to the facilities would open up, and the Jedi moved around, asking to speak with the leader of this place. And deep in the facility, Lama Su was speaking with Tyrannus about the situation. Tyrannus, otherwise known as Dooku, was trying to save this, but there was little hope. It was obvious now that the Jedi knew about Order 66 and the plot to destroy the Jedi with this army. So Dooku said he will speak with his master, and all of this will be taken care of. Lama Su nodded, and Dooku's hologram blinked out, as Obi-Wan Kenobi now stood at the door, holding one of Jango's blasters, saying the Kaminoans will not get away with this. Lama Su said they will see, and Obi-Wan set the blaster to stun before shooting the Prime Minister and hurrying up to find the other Jedi. On Geonosis, Dooku now sent a transmission to Coruscant, where his master was urgently awaiting an update. All of their plans were currently in chaos, and Sidious answered from his Chancellor chair, telling Dooku they have one option. Order 66 must be used immediately. The Jedi will be wiped out, and the Separatists will be blamed, sparking immediate war across the galaxy. Dooku said this was good, and he will remain on Geonosis to monitor the droid factories. Sidious ended the call, and he slowly stood to walk over to his communicator. He had a signal that could connect to all of Kamino, and he would give the order to the clones. The 200 Jedi, the most powerful in the Order, will be trapped on Kamino, and they will all die. But as Sidious reached the communicator, his doors slid open, and Master Yoda stood at the entrance. The Grandmaster asked Palpatine if he is busy, and Sidious just scolded, pulling his red blade into his hands. He didn't have time for this. Yoda kept his own emotions in check as he ignited his green blade, saying the Sith will never truly return, and he flew at Sidious. On Kamino, Obi-Wan Kenobi reached Windu and the rest of the Jedi, and he assured them that he was alright, but he's uncovered the truth. Dooku created the clone army here for the Republic in order to spread war into the galaxy. Windu asked where Dooku is right now, and Obi-Wan said that his transmission to Kamino came from Geonosis. And so Windu said they will get one shot at this. If the clones are ready, then they must take advantage of this army and eliminate the Separatist threat. Obi-Wan asked if they will need Palpatine's approval, but Windu said that Palpatine is the true threat in all of this, and Yoda is taking care of him now. And indeed he was. Yoda and Sidious clashed in the office, blades colliding in a storm of green and red. The air crackled with raw power as Sidious unleashed waves of blue lightning, energy surging through the room, shattering the grand windows behind them. Rain and wind howled into the room, and Yoda leapt effortlessly between the wreckage, Greenblade a blur of light as he deflected each deadly strike, closing the distance between them with absurd speed. Sidious lunged, saber slashing in wicked arcs, but Yoda met him with equal power, parrying each strike as the red and the green slammed against each other. Yoda landed on the desk, then flipped over Sidious as the Dark Lord slammed his blade through the desk. The battle now ascended back to the broken window, where they dueled atop the narrow ledge, hundreds of stories above the city below. The fate of the galaxy was teetering on the edge. Each move was carrying the weight of everyone in the galaxy, and in a final moment, Yoda did what had to be done. He and Sidious stabbed forward at the same time, each of their blades piercing into each other, and both Jedi and Sith fell dead out of the window. And so, without interference from Darth Sidious, the Jedi on Kamino were able to rally all of the clones possible and take off for Geonosis with the intention of ending the war today. Before long, the red sands of Geonosis trembled under the weight of this war as the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen in centuries erupted across the planet. Over 200 Jedi led the charge into the planet, where the droid factories were sitting, cutting through endless waves of battle droids. The Separatists prepared for an execution, not this massive, overwhelming assault. The gunships roared overhead, pouring laser fire into the assembled droid armies as the full might of the Republic arrived. The Separatist Council watched in horror as the battle they'd engineered to spark a war threatened to instead end it before it could begin. Beyond the arena, the desert plains were a battlefield of unparalleled scale. The Republic deployed 200,000 clones. ATTE walkers marched forward, heavy cannons reducing enemy formations to burning wreckage, while the LAAT gunships swarmed the skies, deploying any reinforcements and raining down missiles upon the droid battalions. The Separatist droid armies attempted to hold their ground, but the Jedi assault shattered their ranks. Jedi generals carved a path through enemy lines, leading squads of clones into the heart of Separatist positions, and from above, the Star Destroyers unleashed orbital bombardments, turbo laser fire breaking apart Geonosian spires. And as the Separatist holdouts continued to fall, Dooku attempted to flee, but the Republic closed in from all sides. Jedi starfighters intercepted fleeing shuttles, ARC troopers stormed the last remaining command posts, and with no escape, Dooku was forced into battle against a coalition of Jedi Masters. His red blade would clash against the combined might of Windu, Kenobi, Plo Koon, and Skywalker, who met with the Jedi here after leaving Tatooine. Dooku's legendary skill kept him alive for a bit, but eventually he would be overwhelmed, weapons sliced from his grasp before he was struck down by Windu. And with his death, the CIS would collapse on this very day. And as the dust would settle after this terribly brutal battle, The war that had barely begun was already over. The Republic was victorious, and the Jedi could expose the true nature of Palpatine and Dooku together, with the gathered evidence that Obi-Wan found on Kamino. Yoda's death was tragic, but Plo would step in as Grand Master, as the Jedi were entering into a new era around the galaxy. Chancellor Palpatine would be replaced by Mon Mothma, a young but promising senator from Chandrila, and the clone army on Kamino would be shut down, as the Kaminoans were under investigation. The 200 clones created already would be allowed to stay as Republic security, or be given enough funding to go start a new life in the galaxy. And with the galaxy avoiding war, Anakin Skywalker would tell the Jedi about his budding relationship with Padme, and Grandmaster Plo would allow Anakin to have this attachment, though he would be closely watched, and Plo would work with Windu to re-establish the Jedi Order as peacekeepers for the Republic, as the Sith were gone for good. And folks, that is our video for today. One I enjoyed and one I didn't know what path it was going to take. Bad Batch survived, by the way. They just, they got injured. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was really fun one, actually, one I've enjoyed more than a lot, maybe recently. I don't know, I just really like this one. So hope you guys enjoyed as well. Let me know what you thought down in the comments. If you want to get early access to all the videos by roughly an hour, you can become a member. And yeah, it's just $1 a month. Don't have to, whatever. You just get the videos an hour later anyway. And folks, I'll see you in the next video.